Hello, my name's Keith Willey from the University of Technology in Sydney, and I've been asked as a previous recipient of the A²E² Awards to make a video about what makes a good application and what counts as evidence. I'll do this by referring to my own application. The first award I'd like to look at is the Australian Council of Engineering Deans National Award for Engineering Education Excellence. And you can see there's the citation for the award there, and I've highlighted a number of keywords in red, which I've then put onto the following slide. So some of the things that this award looks for is demonstrated excellence. So it needs to be demonstrated, not just reported, not just saying, well, I've done this, this, and this. How have you demonstrated that? What evidence do you have to back it up? It has to be an enduring positive impact. So it has to be over some period of time. And so it's not surprising that most of the academics that have won this award have been academics for at least 10 years. You have to have a significant and sustained contribution. So not only is it significant, but it needs to be sustainable, and it needs to have been ongoing for some period of time, and preferably at a multi-institution or sector-wide level. So it's a fairly high level of achievement, and it's demonstrated using appropriate evidence. Now, in my application, I decided to focus on three main points, because if you've had a long career as an academic, it's really difficult to put all of what you've done in your career down into your 5 pages of an application. So I recommend that you pick some highlights and some main themes and then provide evidence to support that. So the first thing I talked about in my application was selected A²E² and international recognition of impact in engineering education. I was able to talk about evidence of sustainable impact at institutions I'd worked for, at UNSW, UTS, and U Sydney. I was able to talk about awards that I'd been presented both internally and externally. I had an Engineers Australia Engineering Excellence Award in the Education and Training section. I had an ALTC award and citation, and I'd also got previous awards from A²E². I talked about fellowships, which I've been lucky to have 3. One was ITET, which was a fellowship at UNSW. I had an ALTC fellowship, and I also am a Principal Fellow at the Higher Education Academy. Talked about contributions to EE in general and to A²E² and the other conferences I had attended, journal papers that I'd published. I'd been on the executive. I helped facilitate for many years the winter school. I'd been on accreditation panels. I'd been a guest speaker, workshop facilitator, and I provided evidence to support these claims. I also talked about my contributions nationally and internationally. So I'd made several keynote presentations, or I had visiting scholar appointments at international universities. I'd made a number of presentations and workshops, and I'd been publishing in EE for some period of time. So the second thing I talked about in my application was supporting research-informed practice. And I gave examples of what I call significant and sustained enhancements to educational design, assessment, authenticity, and validity. I focused a lot on the software Spark Plus, which I was the lead developer for, and how improve group work learning outcomes, and not just within engineering education, but internationally across a wide sector. It was easy in this case for me to get evidence because I know that Spark's been used by 53 universities, 36 in Australia and New Zealand, and it involved quite a number of students and quite a range of subjects. I've also run numerous workshops and presentations. So it made it fairly easy to substantiate my claims because the numbers were easy to pull out. There was also testimonials and that we had from universities that have been using the software or had put some of the resources that I developed into place about the impact that it had within their institution. Finally, I talked about my ALTC fellowship. Again, I was lucky here because with an ALTC fellowship, which is the Australian Learning and Teaching Council, which is now defunct, you had to keep evidence all the way and you had to get evaluated. So luckily, I went into this always keeping evidence. So I had 1,300 people that attended 41 presentations I made during about 4 years of my fellowship. 23 of these had been invited. So they weren't organized. People had heard about what I was doing and invited me to do that. I'd also produced written and video resources, which I have put up into a web page and made available. And I was able to draw out of that how many people had viewed or downloaded those particular resources and report that. The one image I used in my application was this map, which had just been in the last 3 months, all the different hits around the world on those resources in that web page. So it is really difficult because most of us get in and do work and we get in and do something. We don't actually plan sometimes to evaluate it or to collect evidence of what the impact was. I was lucky with both Spark Plus work and with this ALTC work that was built into the process. And the other things I talked about in my application were easy to substantiate, and many people had given me evidence and reports. Another good form of evidence is getting testimonials. In other words, when you've gone over and done a keynote presentation, or you've given talked at a symposium, or we've helped another university, getting feedback from that university about the impact of your work and what's happened. And I was very fortunate to have people who supported me in that way, so I was able to provide in my application some key statements from some key stakeholders to support the impact of the work that I'd done. And they weren't just all from engineering education, and they were both national and international, and they were cross-discipline as well. For a lot of people, including myself, one of the biggest difficulties in applying for these awards is actually having to talk about yourself and tell people what you've done. I know that I've found it even difficult making this presentation, but I was asked specifically to talk about the type of things I've done to assist others who may want to apply for these awards to see what type of activities count and what sort of evidence I have to support that. So now I'll move on and talk about evidence. So as I said, one of the hardest things to do in retrospect is to get evidence. If you're planning to apply for this award, then you need to start thinking about your evidence early. Numbers are easy, and I've shown you using that map that I had and the hits on the web page, or the amount of people that attended specific talks or invitations you've had. Those numbers you can collect. Right, but so look for the number of participants you've had. How many people have adopted what you've done if you're doing some sort of intervention or learning technique? Get people to write you a reference and say what the impact of your work was. And it's better if you can do that for this award on a national or an international level. And if you can, across discipline, show that you've got a wider impact, that your EE work's been able to be taken out to another discipline and put to use. Another thing I look at is what I call the before and after impact. So why did you particularly undertake this work? What were you trying to achieve? What was done? What gap were you trying to fill? What it actually did when you did it? How you evaluated it, and whether, because it's a temporal component here, is it still in place? A lot of things that I'd initiated at universities 10 and 15 years earlier were still in use, even though I wasn't actually involved with them anymore. So it shows this sustainability of the impact and the longevity of what you've been able to achieve. Recommendations if you're going for this award or you're trying to build your career, say yes, especially when there's what I call a time-limited opportunity. So if someone says, will you make this presentation, which I've been asked to now, or would you speak at our research group, or would you do something else? Those things are very easy to accept. Sure, they take time to prepare, but it broadens your experience, builds your profile, gives you a wider network. You can always move positions within your university if you don't change universities and move to a different university. So you could more easily have an impact across a different institution. But even if you're at the one institution, use your sabbaticals. Make sure you visit other universities. Make sure you line up some work. Do some significant work at another institution. Accept invitations, as I said, or visiting scholar appointments. Be a mentor. By mentoring someone, an early adopter or a change agent within your university or at another university, it means that your work can go on and be beyond what you're actually doing. And this gives you further evidence of the impact that you've had. So try and collaborate. It's not just about you then trying to drive your work or getting impact. You're working with a team. And as I said, look cross-discipline and not just within your institution. I think one of the other things I would recommend, especially in the early stages of your career, is look for opportunities. Be very proactive. So if you think you've got something to say or something to contribute and you hear that another university is interested, don't necessarily wait for them to come and ask you. Send an email to the convener or give them a call and say, I hear your university's moving into this type of work, or I hear you've got a focus in your teaching and learning symposium about this. And outline what kind of work you're doing and what you can offer that university. And if you be proactive, some people are going to say yes. And then hopefully you do a good job making that presentation, and then word gets around and you'll get more invitations. So as I said, look for opportunities. And I know we don't think about it much, but collect some evidence as you undertake those opportunities, and it'll make it much easier if you're going to apply for an award such as this. If you're trying to have a broad demonstrated impact, start initially within your school and then move it up to your faculty. Then do something university-wide and try and have that impact, and then at another university. You can do that by attending their teaching and learning symposiums or retreat. It's often easier to be heard outside of your own university. People like to listen to an invited speaker sometimes more than they like to listen to one of their own. Never waste a trip. So the other thing, if you're trying to build things for and evidence for this type of award, if you're going to a conference overseas, you're going to a conference in Australia and it's not in your own state,